Chapter 21. The Trial of Ashley Fox. Ashley's cell was made of rusted metal walls and a cold steel floor. A raised wooden platform was covered with a hard mat for a bed. There was no sink or toilet, just an exposed drain in the far corner. Sometime the next morning, 3 guards dragged her from her cell. They restrained her in a specially designed wheelchair. Once she was gagged and hooded, they wheeled her from the block. Ash couldn't tell if the elevator traveled up or down. When the doors opened, Ash felt the chilly air of an outdoor level. She didn't hear any voices as the guards wheeled her away from the elevator block. When they stopped and removed the hood, Ash recognized what appeared to be a hastily constructed court on an unfinished level of the district. The room, composed of unpainted sheets of drywall on a cement floor, was created in the shape of a horseshoe. Beyond one partition she saw a plastic-draped exterior wall. The open window ledge and distant horizon were only partially obscured by the opaque sheets of ripped and tattered plastic. The cement was scuffed and marked. The ceiling was lined with terrarium beams. A folding table and a chair stood in a row atop a wooden platform. Another row sat facing opposite, albeit a foot lower in elevation. I-beam pillars stood at 4 points in the room, and 2 more occupied the open space beyond the end of the horseshoe. Ash was wheeled up to the rightmost table. Her seat faced the plastic-sheeted opening to the sky 50 meters across the unfinished level. She wondered if they meant to simply throw her overboard and be done with it. Why then all the elaborate, or rather crude efforts at the construction of a courtroom? Perhaps the informality served to reinforce her level of importance, or lack thereof. She remembered to breathe. Guards milled about, not paying much attention to her. She studied the building materials stacked outside the courtroom. Drywall, plastic-wrapped carpet, boxed cubicle panels, and spools of terrarium wire. The young officer tasked with drafting Ashley's arrest warrant sat to her left. Another man entered, introduced himself as her public defender, and took the seat next to Ash. The gagged and restrained teen made no effort to acknowledge him. Across from them, a young woman, a stenographer, entered and occupied a small chair set away from the imposing platform. She removed a large pair of headphones from her bag and set them around her neck. She then removed a cylindrical device and set it on the floor next to her. She hit a button, powering up the recording suite, and it automatically extended its tripod legs, raising itself 20 inches from the floor. A central post rose an additional 3 feet up from the cylinder. The stenographer connected her headphones and set them over her ears. She removed her goggles from the bag, connected their cable, and placed them over her eyes. She hit a button on the control panel and the indicator on the camera assembly began to blink its red recording light. A massive guard noted the light. "All rise," he commanded. Everyone stood, except Ashley, who was strapped into her seat. Not that she would have, even if she'd been free to do so. From the left, an elderly woman dressed in a black judge's cloak entered and proceeded to the central chair of the raised platform. "The Court of District 13 is now in session. Honorable Governor Agatha Dorchester Maine presiding," the bailiff proclaimed. The governor-judge lifted her gavel and rapped it once. "Be seated," the bailiff ordered. Everyone not already sitting sat. "So what do we have today?" she asked, as though this case were just another day on the job. "People versus Ashley Fox," the bailiff replied. "What's the charge?" the judge asked. The prosecutor stood. "If it please the court." Governor Mame nodded. "Your Honor, the state charges Orphan 2310091503, Miss Ashley Erin Fox, with 1 count of murder in the first degree and 1 count of assault with intent to kill." The attorney approached the judge's table. "Specifically, the state charges Miss Fox with murder on behalf of Orphan 2292121701, Robert Leland Kidd, whom she killed in an illegal pit fight, cutting his throat." The prosecutor handed a stapled file to the judge. "The state also charges Miss Fox with assault with intent to kill on behalf of Orphan 22900611002, Moses Modred Mohammed." The prosecutor handed Governor Mame another file. "The state will prove that Miss Fox is a danger to herself and others. We are recommending that she be tried as an adult, and the state is seeking the death penalty in this case." "Miss Fox, due to the gravity of these charges, the state has no choice but to try you as an adult." She picked up her gavel and rapped it on the tabletop. "As you're an orphan, with no resources, the The state will provide you with counsel at no expense. Mr. Gransell, do you accept the responsibility to defend your client to the best of your ability? She addressed the public defender next to Ash. Yes, Your Honor, he replied. Prosecutor, please state your case, Governor Mames said. Governor, Your Honor, the state argues that Miss Fox and Mr. Kidd had words earlier in the day, an incident taking place on the southwest rooftop of the Bolt, known as the Zoo. Will the defendant please rise? Governor Mames asked. The gagged and restrained Ashley remained seated. Let the record show that Miss Fox is held in contempt for willfully disregarding the order to stand before the court. Governor Mames spoke to the stenographer, who nodded. Miss Ashley Fox, you are hereby charged with the murder of one Robert Leland Kidd. How do you plead? The gagged Ashley made no attempt to speak. Auntie waited a moment and turned to the stenographer again. Let the record show that the defendant entered a plea of no contest. Governor Mames rapped her gavel and said, The court is adjourned. Lieutenant Gray entered the mayor's office shortly before 10 a.m. The secretary asked him to identify himself and state the nature of his visit. The lieutenant replied that he urgently needed to speak to His Honor regarding District 13. He was asked to take a seat. Kima and the other Leonas ambushed a patrol. 2 guards were murdered on the spot. Their bodies were later discovered castrated, their genitalia stuffed into each other's mouths. The 3rd soldier was kidnapped and dragged back to the Leona's block, where he spent the next few days being conditioned to death. Despite Kasimov's publicly demanded truce, 3 dragons faced off against 3 blades in another cafeteria. Someone blinked and the unarmed gangsters were fighting. However, they fought with a suspicious lack of physical violence, more yelling than punching. The altercation devolved into a food fight and soon the entire cafeteria was involved. A group of guards arrived to quell the violence and discovered themselves outnumbered and surrounded. They wisely surrendered their weapons and armor. Several more patrols waded into the chaos, only to be likewise ambushed and stripped of their weapons and gear. Before long, a dozen soldiers had been overpowered and disarmed. But unlike the Leona's engagement, the dragons and blades released the guards unharmed. By the end of the lunch hour, 6 handguns had been taken by the juvenile residents of District 13. Much to Warden Keller's dismay, the blades and dragons were caught congratulating each other over the security feed. He summoned his majors to the command room. They sat at the conference table. Reports? Keller asked. In the last 24 hours we've had 2 men killed, 20 critically injured, 5 MIA. To the best of our knowledge, the lucky bastards have at least 7 firearms and over a dozen batons. Major Armitage replied. What the fuck is going on out there, gentlemen? Someone please explain to me how the world's most elite fighting force is getting their asses handed to them by a bunch of school children. Ambush, sir. Starts as a gang fight, our boys get involved, then they join forces and take them by surprise, Major Dumont stated. Surprise? How do you take a squad involved in a fight by surprise? Our orders are not to fire unless fired upon. These kids are mostly unarmed. We can't just light them up. Plus, our guys are green, sir. They're not elite. They're not even National Guard. I don't want excuses, I want results, Keller snapped. Watrous leaned forward. Sir, our men have sent 20 Zeros to the morgue in the last 20 hours. It's almost 1 an hour, plus countless rabbits in the ICU. We can all do the math, Major. I'm not interested in how many of these rabid monkeys break their teeth on a citizen's boot. I do grow concerned when they start working together. It shows evidence of higher intellectual function. Next thing you know, they'll be talking. What if they learn to write? Then all of a sudden one of them builds a bomb and it's kaboom. No more majors. The majors remained silent. Ambushed, huh? Coordinated? Planned? Clearly, sir. If we had some reinforcements, we could. First, let's rule a few things out. 1, we're not calling in reinforcements. 2, we're not calling in reinforcements. Any other suggestions? Assault rifles, sir. Let's remind them who runs the district. A couple of heads on spikes couldn't hurt either. We know who the ringleaders are, Watrous asserted. Dumont leaned forward. Really? Who? Watrous hesitated. We do not know. We might know who it isn't, but we don't know who it is. These gangs who, up until yesterday, were hell-bent on killing each other are now working together, Dumont said. We know it's not the girl. We know it's not Moses, and we know it's not the kid Dante. History has shown us that our primary targets must be the ringleaders, and And we know who runs each of the gangs, correct? Yes, sir. We just don't know who brokered the deal. If we ratchet up the pressure, we'll only add to their ranks, Dumont answered. Armitage thought for a moment and then smiled. We could close all the cafeterias and reduce the patrols by half. The men are exhausted. Outfit the hard posts in SWAT gear and less lethal ammo, in case more weapons get taken. If we give the bastards a false sense of security, when the real trouble starts, we can extinguish it immediately. Actually, we do know where this resistance started. It's the same knot of kids that was hanging around Fox. Supposedly, her brother was there when they took down Fleming, Hodges, and Gray. Also, we never recovered Gray's body. The little bastards actually sent the other two back by elevator, but the docs couldn't save them, Watcher said. Colonel Keller leaned back in his chair. Once rebels commence hit-and-run tactics, we're required to declare martial law. That always puts the mayor's dick in the soup. We're getting a new batch of gunners Monday. We don't have to call anyone. For the next 6 weeks, we'll have double our usual numbers. We just need to get to Monday, by any means necessary, Armitage said. Watrous laughed. We should drug them into next week, literally. Too expensive, the colonel answered. What if we smash them up a bit first? Armitage reasoned. This is all about that Fox girl. Let's execute the bitch. That'll shut them up. Major Dumont rolled his eyes. If we martyr her, this whole place will burn. We need to keep them fighting amongst themselves, not against us. The colonel stared at his majors, then smiled and leaned forward. I like the suggestion of cutting the patrols in half and the less lethal ammunition. Issue the rifles and load them with pinks. Lock up the live shells and keep plenty of special response teams on standby. One more thing. Offer amnesty on any returned weapons and gear. If they turn over the gear, we'll release Miss Fox. The deadline is noon on Thursday. Just to show them we're serious, round up at least 100 rugrats and spend the next 12 hours reminding them that they're worthless. And I mean make them feel ugly. Don't waste your time with the muscleheads. We can hurt them worse by damaging their little brothers. I want this message to reach the ringleaders loud and clear. Keller stood. Gentlemen. Lieutenant Gray remained in the anteroom of the mayor's office, waiting. As the secretary left for the day, she assured him that Mayor Westbury would be along shortly. She said good night and left the building. Groups of guards prowled the district, armored in full SWAT issue. Randomly, they subdued errant orphans. Their orders were to beat 20 for every one they placed under arrest. Before nightfall, the district had begun conditioning procedures on 112 orphans, and the nursing staff was held back for double shifts. Just before 8 p.m., the mayor stepped out of his office, dressed in his coat and hat. Flanked by bodyguards and trailed by his personal secretary Leonard Waltman, His Honor approached the young lieutenant, dozing on the anteroom couch. The mayor roughly jabbed him with his cane. Lieutenant, wake up! Gray woke with a start. Your Honor, sir. Gray rose to his feet. He towered over the rotund municipal authority. The mayor was unperturbed by Gray's physically threatening stature, and he pushed ahead. Indeed. What are you doing sleeping out here? Come walk with me. Tell me your woes. Westbury was a hugely fat man, and his frame did not appear to have been constructed to support such massive bulk. The cane was definitely for balance and support rather than style. Mr. Mayor, I'm here in the interest of confidentiality. Westbury stopped as they reached the elevator and looked up at Gray, taking a good close look at him. What do you mean by that? You have a situation developing in one of your districts, and I thought you should be informed personally. Well, then inform me and stop speaking in riddles. District 13. What about it? What else do I need to say? I told you not to waste my time. The elevator car arrived. Westbury stepped on, followed by his secretary Waltman. He stared at Gray. Well, what are you waiting for? Westbury gestured for Gray to step aboard the car. Gray nodded, began to stammer a reply, but thought better of it and simply stepped aboard the elevator. What's wrong with you? Westbury asked, looking directly at David again. Nothing, sir. Well, it can't be nothing, Westbury grumbled, looking down. His glance fell to David's waist and lingered there. David wanted to step away, but the elevator car left little actual room for escape. The mayor looked back up to David's name tag and all-black Kodak. The elevator dinged and the door opened onto the parking garage. Westbury waddled off first, followed by Gray and Waltman leisurely taking his time. Westbury raised a fat finger in the air. "Presuming I do know a little something about the troubles of Block 13, what would you have me do, Lieutenant?" "If you're thinking about doing something publicly, that would be difficult. You'd have to establish a pattern of abuse over time." "Am I to understand you're suggesting a black op against an orphanage?" "Of course not." Westbury's gaze again fell to David's gun belt, and suddenly he understood. They stood waiting at the valet area while Waltman walked to the vehicle, unlocked it, and pulled it around. Westbury opened the door for himself and climbed inside. Again, David was left waiting. This time he didn't make the mayor ask him, and after a moment climbed into the luxury cruiser. Once the vehicle lifted off and got into the relative safety of the municipal flow, the mayor turned to Gray. "I am well aware of the conditions aboard the district. I have long been seeking a solution, but the problems are pervasive and systemic. This could be a very big black eye for Angel City. I'd like to avoid that. However, eradication of a weed or a cancer sometimes requires surgical procedures." Gray felt a bit of fear as he tried to balance the mayor's words against his rapacious grin. When they arrived at Westbury's home and stepped out of the vehicle, His Honor informed the soldier that he now wanted to ask a favor of him. The mayor looked David in the eyes and said, "We're the same, you and I." "How's that, sir?" Lieutenant Gray replied. "We both hold significant positions of authority. Wouldn't you agree?" David smelled a linguistic trap. "I don't consider myself significant or any sort of authority. You, sir, are in a position of power, not me." "Don't patronize me, son." The mayor turned surly. The lieutenant bowed his head. "I meant no disrespect." David was well aware that this man could charge him with treason and have him executed with a nod. "If I understand correctly, you are Senator Gray's boy, old Dakota's grandson?" "Yes, sir," David answered. "You know Dakota once lived on District 13. He was an orphan. Did you know that?" Gray nodded. "Your father has sired himself quite a number of sons, hasn't he?" "5 that I know of, sir," Gray answered. "Judging by that solid black kodak there, you are David Gray. Is that right?" David nodded again. "Well then, about that favor." The mayor gestured to the young officer's holstered weapon on his hip. "Could I?" The lieutenant drew the sidearm and checked that it was on safe before turning it over. "I understand that this is the one you used?" David nodded again. His cordial expression fell to reveal the true lack of emotion he felt, the true lack of empathy or concern he held for this obese creature, this fan, standing before him. During his citizenship induction ceremony, David made history. 1007 was not a number easily brushed aside. His nickname amongst his comrades, Kilo, attested to that. Instead of being vilified, as he'd hoped, instead of the practice being outlawed, David became something of a cult hero, overnight. He'd been immediately drafted into the Special Forces, and after completing the required schools, he was issued the highly prized all-black Kodak, the designation of a wet worker, elite amongst all the Republic's military units. Lieutenant Gray was always disappointed to discover one of his superiors was a fan. It reinforced his impression of how corrupt the society was. The attitude probably had something to do with his stale rank as first lieutenant. Westbury practically drooled over the weapon. The mayor took aim at a street sign and illegally discharged 3 rounds, hitting it with 2 of them. He smiled and handed the gun back. Gray knew Mayor Westbury hadn't listened to a single thing he'd said about D-13. All he'd wanted was to fire the weapon that executed 1,000 men in a single day. Westbury instructed Waltman to have the street sign framed and hung in his study. Back on the district, the screams of pain coming from the conditioning blocks could be heard for half a mile. The guards tortured the randomly arrested children without mercy. In one cell they used fire, in another water, electricity, drugs, splinters, pliers, and every other imaginable torture device close at hand. The soldiers didn't try and get any information, and their prisoners didn't have answers. The evening's activities were all about the infliction and endurance of pain. The nurses came in during lulls in the action to administer derivatives of the magnificent healing compound Ashley's father created a generation ago. In 2 weeks, All that will remain of their suffering will be nightmares and their distinct memories of the experience. In their recreation rooms, the members of the Iron Fist sat on couches, arranged around a mounted vid screen. Guards didn't come this far down into the complex, especially considering the latest acts of mutiny and the numbers of critically wounded citizens. Hambone leaned over to Kaz. Word is they rounded up 100 kids. I got another honey between you and me. Says they bust down our door before lights out. Hambone alone laughed at the macabre joke. Come on, no takers? Ham said loudly. The other orphans did not find Hambone's joke to be amusing. No one laughed or spoke. A bell rang. It was 11. The lights clicked off. Guess not, Hambone laughed. I should have taken your money, you dick, Kaz said. In her lightless cell, tied into a straitjacket, Ashley sat in quiet meditation, much as her father had a couple years earlier. Chapter 22. Assault Rifles and Rubber Bullets. Wednesday, September 21st, 2310. Per the Colonel's orders, the cafeterias were closed. However, with guards only manning half their usual posts, there was nothing to prevent the hungry children from breaking into the chow halls. Every third or fourth cafeteria was full of kids. No guards were anywhere to be seen. The Zeros who'd been beaten sported casts over broken bones, stitches, and red and blue stained bandages. Despite the fact the interrogators had been told that extracting information about ringleaders was not a priority, old habits died hard. They had spent a night beating the story into and out of the kids, but all the orphans remembered was pain. Hambone, Kaz, and a few other members of the Fist entered a liberated cafeteria. Kids everywhere looked up. They recognized him. Since Ashley had been taken, Kaz and the Iron Fist were all the orphans talked about. A bandaged child approached them. He had one arm in a cast. His face and lips were cut and bruised. He stared at Kaz. Kaz thought perhaps the young orphan was angry with him. After all, it was his attack on Hodges and crew that had caused this latest mess. The boy raised a single fist. The kids who could cheer and clap did, applauding Kaz and the other members of the Iron Fist. Hambone rolled his eyes and headed for the limited breakfast fare. Later, as they sat at a table, Hambone spoke over tightly clenched fists. I still can't believe they took 100 kids. Tanaka leaned back. What do we do about it? Jones sat up. If they separate us, get us all fighting each other again, they'll kill us, slowly. We have to stick together, Hambone agreed. So far the plan is working. They're panicked. Now we gather resources, weapons, prepare for the next attack, Drews added. We'll all have to fight. It'll be soon, and it'll be heavy. Make sure everyone eats, Kazimov said. Yama and Frost stood guard as an adult, a civilian devil, disguised as a teacher's assistant, met with Dante. The area was a large game room, featuring several couches and a number of orphans involved in one form of leisure or another. When Sergeants Harrison and Wolfgar showed up, Yama and Frost managed to hold them off long enough for Dante at least to be informed. Wolfgar and his sidekick entered the Devil's Wing and found Dante sitting at a huge desk, signing a series of checks. They walked up and stood directly in front of the preoccupied teen. The block had a lot of open space, interrupted by an occasional wall and spotted with couches and vidstream sets. The racks were loosely clustered around the areas with more intact walls, but everything had been so shifted and rebuilt, the area no longer resembled a prison at all. Each living area blended into the next. Some spots had been converted into kitchens, the ventilation so artfully blended with the existing infrastructure as to be nearly invisible. Dante was dressed in an immaculately white linen suit. He tried hard to ignore the soldiers standing before him, but that was impossible, so he simply made them wait while he finished signing the checks. So? Sergeant Wolfgar snapped. So what? Dante asked without looking up. Some lucky bunny lost his shit and declared war on the state. I'm taking it personally. Then why are you talking to me? I'm a peaceful resident with a record of cooperation. Wolfgar stepped forward. Far as I'm concerned, you shamrocks would all be better off shifting 6 feet of dirt, but it ain't up to me. I'm here to tell you, Lucky Rabbit, we want the gats, we want the batons, we want the badges, the shields, the armor, and every other piece of stolen gear. All of it. Back by noon tomorrow or you're all burning. Promises, promises, Dante replied. Harrison stepped forward. It's called amnesty. Tomorrow at 12:01 it ends. Did you just learn that word? Dante asked. Bite me, Harrison answered. Dante laughed. You think I'm happy about this? Are you even aware what this shit is costing me? It's going to cost you your life if you're not careful, Wolfgar said. Is that what you were sent here to tell me? To make myself useful? No, we were sent here to tell you that you have amnesty until noon tomorrow. We came here to you, specifically, because we figured we might get through the conversation without killing you. What about announcing it on the vid screens, the same way you clowns do everything else? You own the feed, why not use it? Don't be stupid. Kinda like trying to piss into the wind, isn't it? You can't broadcast amnesty because you'd have to admit there are half a dozen loose nines in the block. It'd be all over the news in less than an hour. So instead, you come down here like you own the place. You want my answer? Go fuck yourself. Wolfgar's rage painted his features a hostile red. Dante remained in his chair. The sergeant coolly checked the chamber of his assault weapon. Dante stood and came out from around the desk. Wolfgar took a step forward. What you got, Mitsubishi? The teen walked directly up to the soldiers, challenging them to shoot him. This is the devil's house. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? You think you're untouchable? Harrison switched his weapon off safe. You're not. Dante stepped directly into Harrison, but Wolfgar pushed them apart. Out of sight, dozens of metallic clicks and clacks and snaps were heard. Given the number and variety, it was difficult to tell how many were firearms and how many were some other bladed, chained, or projectile-type weapon, all waiting nearby. Devils filled the block. They were all around them, and they were paying close attention. There was no chance Wolfgar and Harrison would be walking out if anything went wrong. The teacher's assistant waited quietly. As a representative of the Devils, the adult professional gang outside District 13, he did not want to get caught up in a shootout, but he smiled at Dante just the same. Dante stepped back, out of the soldier's personal space. He reached into his pocket, but before Harrison and Wolfgar could aim at him, he'd pulled out a pack of smokes. They'd flinched and regretted it. Dozens of teens snickered and laughed. Dante lit a cigarette. Let me ask you something. He leaned back against the front of the desk, exhaling twin plumes of smoke. Fate and circumstance stuck us orphans here, but you chose to be a pig. Dante leveled a finger at the sergeant's chest. Maybe you didn't choose to be stuck in this shithole, but here you are, and it's your own damn fault. My question for you is, do you think that was unlucky or just plain stupid? Harrison stepped forward. We're the ones holding the guns. On children, and they're loaded with pretty pink rubber bullets. What kind of impotent loser does that make you? Wolfgar raised a hand to restrain Harrison. Dante raised his eyebrows. Your suggestion that I make myself useful to your superiors is pathetic. I'm disappointed. Your boss is obviously an idiot. But what about you? You could have been a painter, a musician, a race car driver. But you chose to be a pig, and I just don't get it. Dante paused and dramatically took a drag from his cigarette. You know what I'd do? If I were you, in your shoes right now with everything that's going on here, I'd quit. I'd resign. Today, right now, before I had to try and defend my life with those pansy-ass rubber bullets. 'Cause you will lose, and that would suck. The smoke from his cigarette curled up and obscured the space between them. It was Sergeant Wolfgar's turn to smile. I don't know where you got your information, but I always carry hot, son. Test me and see. Maybe we'll just let that little girl loose after all. Bring her down here and let her finish what she started. Dante smiled, took another drag. Fine. Tomorrow noon, Crossroads Elevator Bank at the center of the mall. I'll sort it out. We'll all be there, with all your weapons and your pretty little badges. You bring her, we'll make a peaceful trade, and we'll all go our separate ways. That's a good little zero, Wolfgar said, leaning back. The soldiers and the teens stared each other down. Dante exhaled an impossible volume of smoke. Here's a bit of news. The Leona's got a hold of one of your guys. Word is they're juicing him on crystal and lapis, making him their bitch, making him fetch 'em shit, paint their toenails, give 'em rim jobs. Real cowardly bitch shit. I heard they're selling it. Live stream. Wolfgar scowled, but didn't interrupt. Let me know if you liked it. I hear they're pretty wild, those butch-ass dykes. Dante said, tapping ash from his cigarette over a golden tray on his desk. Now get the fuck out of my office or I'll have you skinned alive. The guards, having said their piece, turned to leave the block. Dante tossed something shiny over Harrison's head. It flashed and glittered before crashing to the ground, where it bounced and slid along the floor. His hand went to his chest. Dante laughed as the sergeant discovered his badge was missing. Harrison spun, raising his weapon. Dante had just picked up his expensive pen. Harrison fired. The ink stick exploded with a great splash of black. Dante's white suit was heavily splattered, instantly a modern art masterpiece. Harrison and Wolfgar both laughed obnoxiously. Dante smiled. You should be putting those skills to work against our communist friends, don't you think? Nah, I'm not that good. I was aiming for your head. Wolfgar retrieved the badge from the floor, handing it to and exiting with Harrison. The teacher's assistant smiled and stood. That was fun. It's a job. Dante smiled and handed over the stack of signed checks. Lieutenant Gray walked into his father's office building in the executive district. It's not often that his father was on the West Coast, and he counted himself lucky for the coincidence. Then he remembered he didn't believe in coincidence, and wondered if his father was somehow tied up in D-13. David was shown to a private suite just down the hall. The senator arrived rather quickly, considering they'd had so little to say to each other for so long. Danforth, his father, gestured to a nearby set of couches. They sat. After a moment of shared silence, his father got directly to the point. He gestured to his son's holstered weapon. Is that it? David nodded, removed the handgun from its holster, checked the chamber, and gave it to his father. Danforth held it out, switched the safety off, on, off again. I asked them to let you have it. Did you know? David's silent reply fit the circumstances, as his father put 5 rounds into a nearby chair. The volume and concussion of the weapon unnerved the old man. It had been a while since he'd fired a gun indoors without proper hearing protection. That chair costs $20,000. Probably worth more now, David said. They both laughed. The senator returned the pistol to his son. David holstered the hot gun. I wish I could sit our governor right there. State? Balthazar? What's he done? District. Psycho bitch named, get this, Mame. He watched his father's expression. What's the issue? That district needs a bath. Yeah, that's not all. What do you know about it? I know that the governor of D-13 is niece to the mayor, or cousin. Ah, the penny drops. Regardless, this is an orphanage, not a prison. What's that? Danforth asked. Well, it's an orphanage and a prison. I thought it was a gang rehab facility. It is. It's also a fully functioning orphanage. Kids of all ages. You know your grandfather was there. David nodded. It's insane. They're chewing them up. Every way you want to imagine it, they're guilty. One of the gangs put an end to sales a few months ago, but the rest is worse. And why are you bringing this to me? The chain of command there is utterly compromised. Whatever I do on my own reflects on you. I figured since you were here, at least I could do you the courtesy before I burn it down. You're going to go back then? Not officially, no. Well, what will you do? Career-wise, I mean. How will you square it with the Republic? Senator Gray asked. I don't think that'll be a problem for me. The lawyers will do all that. My part just has to be neat. I can arrange a team for you. I can also check out what firewalls are in place, if any, the senator offered. Thanks, I'd appreciate it. There's at least a few. I ran a cursory scan at ACB level white and we got 4 active protocols in play. 1 or 2 of them might even be legit, but I'll need to know which before I just go off and nuke it. Well, you're not going to nuke it, are you? I mean, not really, right? The end result will be the same. I think we can avoid the radioactive fallout, though. It might be politically radioactive, but I won't use depleted uranium shells or anything. Still, you are talking about blowing an entire district from the horizon. Are you mad? I don't think many people would argue that, David laughed. But if you were there, you'd know. This is not just a head change. The place needs to go. You can't just wash it clean. Coming from the all-black Kodak. Yeah, well, I did earn it. Point of fact, I believe I was put there for a reason, and I believe that reason is to handle this issue as I see fit. That's one way to look at it. It's the only way to look at it. Anything else could be regarded as treason. Son, at this level, anything you do could be treason. The winners will write the history. Ha! By that logic, only winning is not treasonous then. Chapter 23. Slow Train Comin'. Wednesday afternoon, September 21st, 2310. Dante, Yama, and Frost drew the eyes of every orphan as they crossed the athletic fields. Word quickly reached Kaz and the others. As Dante approached, sans Kane, the present members of the Iron Fist paused their video games. Kazmov, Dante said. What do you want? Kaz asked, standing up. The Mongo rumor had been confirmed. Dante had stabbed the giant orphan through the heart. No one wanted to be caught sleeping when he showed up. I've come to apologize, Dante said sincerely. Kaz didn't buy it. He came around the low table and approached the trio of devils. Of similar height and build, he and Dante had once been evenly matched. As they'd grown older, Kaz had stayed in sports and become the captain of the punchball team. Now he had a good 15 pounds of solid muscle over Dante. It was so obvious that Kaz had the advantage in a fair fight that Dante absolutely could not be trusted. Instead of sports, Dante had gone into business, moving from one gang to the next. Kaz knew that the devils pulled in almost 20 to 50 grand a month, sometimes a week. Dante needed the status quo to remain calm. He needed things to get back to normal in order to turn a profit. Yet the handgun tucked into Kazimov's belt rendered the issue moot. You do need to apologize, but not to me, Kaz said. Dante reached into his back pocket. For a moment, everyone held their breath. Kaz's hand twitched toward the weapon at his waist. Dante slowly, deliberately taunting everyone, pulled out his pack of cigarettes. Kaz stepped forward and slapped the cigarettes from his hand. Someday that little trick is going to get you killed. He was right in Dante's face. Dante didn't flinch or back up. He didn't even look at the pack. He just stared directly into Kazimov's eyes. Not today, apparently. Dante glanced down at the weapon tucked into Kazimov's pants. He smiled. What's that old samurai saying? My enemy has a sword, I have a sword. Like a chess player who realized he's left himself vulnerable to checkmate, a cold sweat broke out over Kaz's body. The gun, which he'd so proudly shown off, now hung right over his dick, well within arm's reach of his most dangerous enemy. Instead of letting Dante light a cigarette and occupy his hands with something, Kaz had provoked him and practically offered him the gun. Was it unsafe? He wondered. How could he step backward after slapping down the smokes? He would lose all his influence if he showed the slightest hint of fear. These thoughts drenched his mind with bitter adrenaline. His mouth watered, his stomach flipped, twice, then 3 times. Dante inched closer, no more than 8 inches between them. So you're Mr. Clean, huh? Never jumped in? No gang life for you, right? You're gonna be somebody. You were gonna be a star. Dante stepped back, turning away from Kaz and fetching his pack of smokes. But not now, not no more. So what now, hero? Dante smiled. Orphans surrounded them. Dante saw most of them displayed some piece of cop gear, like the formation of a new tribe or gang, the Kid Cops. You know the difference between us? Kaz asked. Dante shook his head. Kaz drew the 9 and offered it to the gang leader. I still remember when we were friends. Dante hesitated. Kaz watched him closely. Now it was Dante's turn to sweat. Kaz knew he couldn't refuse the weapon and not look like a dick, but accepting it meant accepting a gesture of friendship, as well as taking something from the striker, even if it was just holding his gun. When in Rome, Dante said, perching a cigarette between his lips and accepting the weapon. He held it like a professional, with both hands, at a 45-degree angle to the floor. He slid the bolt back far enough to expose the loaded chamber. Kaz didn't move. Dante released the bolt with a snap. He clicked the weapon back over to safe and lowered it to his side. You should keep this darling on safe if you're going to jock her like that, sport. Now, like I said, I came down here to apologize. For something specific or just being a bell end in general? Hambone offered. Dante glared at him and flicked the weapon from safe back to fire. Yama and Frost laughed. Hambone lifted his shirt, exposing his extravagant gut and another light 9 tucked into his belt. You take that yourself, or did someone give it to you? Dante teased him. You want to try and take it from me? Ham asked. Like candy from a fatty, Dante answered, with a generous smile, the handgun held low at his side. Only Yama and Frost laughed, both relieving some of the tension, yet antagonizing the situation simultaneously. Kaz addressed Dante. So what exactly are you here for? Apologizing for what? Sending Yama after the baton? No, actually, that's just business. Dante shrugged and handed the gun back to Kazimov. Then you might want to apologize for giving a girl over to the fuzz, Hambone stated. Fuck her. Psycho bitch broke my nose. Kaz, Hambone, Sky, and several others enjoyed a laugh at Dante's expense, yet he continued undaunted. She's a threat to all of us. She is crazy. You heard what she did to Ronnie, and you saw what she did to Marco. Carver's in the hospital and can't turn his head around. Dante raised his hands. Okay, Carver's a scumbag, and maybe he had it coming. We can all agree on that. But Ronnie? I mean, come on. That kid never hurt anyone. He's the nicest guy. And she stabbed his goddamn eyes out. Over nothing. Over a $2 shirt. Told him to go buy new ones. The hell is that, man? Rotten Ron? Kaz asked. Big pimpin', Dante answered. Stabbed his eyes out? Kaz asked. With a rusty piece of wire. Sounds like some shit Lethal might do, doesn't it? Hambone asked. Several kids nodded and mumbled affirmations were plainly heard. Not anymore, Sky said loudly. Dante snarled at her. How'd she jack you? Hambone asked. In the elevator, taking her down to see her brother in ICU, Dante explained. Hambone looked back at Jeff. How did he end up in ICU? Lethal kicked him down the escalators, Dante answered without thinking. The block was quiet for a couple seconds. And Ronnie knew that, didn't he? Hambone pointed out. It happened 10 feet from his stall. Lethal gave him the kid's shirt, so I'm guessing, yeah. If nothing else, Dante prided himself on his balls and honesty. Hambone nodded. He saw it happen. Anyhow, we're in the elevator, and I asked her, why'd you do Ronnie like that? He didn't do nothing to you. You asked her that? Hambone inquired. Yeah, what the hell? Dante replied. And that's why she broke your nose? Hambone asked. No, I asked her and she was all quiet like. She thought about it for a bit, right? And then the bitch said, I'm still really upset about my parents being dead. And man, what the fuck? I asked her, you think that makes you special in an orphanage? No one said anything for a second. Sky suddenly burst into joyous best Christmas ever laughter. She laughed so hard she started coughing. Hambone and Kaz laughed. Even Yama and Frost laughed. Soon the whole block was laughing. Dante laughed in spite of himself, but he didn't seem to get the joke. That was when she blasted me in the face, man. I didn't even see her turn around. I mean, what the hell was that for? Kaz shook his head, smiling. Sometimes you can really be an idiot. What? Dante asked. Sky smiled. You're lucky all she did was break your nose. Do you have any idea how much she's cost us? In 1 week, I have to answer to higher powers just like everyone else here. The bosses heard they were looking at almost $1 million in reconstructive surgeries, and her number is up, one way or another. Kaz shook his head. So she's a threat? You're a threat to everyone you meet. Dante grew serious again. Listen to me. The reason I'm down here, man, the pigs are coming down hard. They're hot about the ambushes. Guess they resent having Porkchop here running up their backside. Point is, they're all freaked out. I mean, really, look at you guys. Every kid as far as I can see is holding a piece of state-issued gear. You guys look like some mad band of misfits. Keystone Cops meets Lord of the Flies. What kind of mashup is that? Dante looked over at Hambone again. Even the tubby bellhop is packing. Butter, bacon, and jam, baby, Hambone smiled. And? Kaz asked. And, okay, I was wrong. You're right. We have to work together, or the show is over for all of us. They want the gear back. They're offering you a deal. Give up the guns, the badges, and the armor, and they'll let her go. Tomorrow at noon. Center of the Bolt Garden Mall. $1 million ways in or out, you know. Dante sounded sincere. You're serious? Hambone asked. When's the last time I came down here? You drop the gear, they let her go. That's the deal. Happily ever after. No way, Kaz said. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap, Hambone answered. The whole district is a trap. But we're already here, so what the hell? We do it all at once, we'll have the numbers, instead of letting them pick us off one at a time. Dante raised a hand. Notice I said you give up the gear, they give up the girl. They were specific about that. Notice the order. You give up the gear first. That part was clear, Dante said. Screw that. If they don't let her go, they're going to need a lot more than rubber bullets. Kaz tucked the gun into his belt. I'm tired of being guarded by soldiers with stun batons, rifles, and riot gear. They want to wear that shit? Let's give them a reason. The kids cheered and slammed their shields like ancient warriors before a battle. You're insane, the lot of you, Dante said. Are you going to be there? Kaz asked. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The Mackenzie Pass Shopping Center was home to the Mercury Outfielder, a famous cop bar. The strip mall floated with a dozen other such facilities out in the residential subdivided atmospheric soup of the Southern California sunset. The center was anchored along the western spine of a suburban commercial hub, out on the edge of the Tarzana airspace. It sported a few dozen shops, restaurants, and clerical operations along with the carbon fiber docks and an internal parking structure. There were no working surveillance cameras, and conversations could be had with some measure of privacy. The setting sun illuminated the drab interior of the bar with a startlingly beautiful light. Gray sat on one of the stools, leaning on the bar, blissfully drunk. An old comrade/instructor recognized him and came over. Gray's iconic position in the Republic's pop history had a way of leaving an impression. People remembered him, whether he remembered them or not. First Sergeant King stood in the bar next to him. What's going on, killer? Before he took offense, David remembered that King called everyone killer, the way someone else might call his friends Bud or Champ. King towered over David, tall and heavy. He'd fought as a champion kickboxer, winning a dozen Muay Thai trophies for his battalion. Most of the time, he was a first-rate Special Forces operative. It was rare to see him in a bar, and it was just as rare for David to be there. David reminded himself that he did not believe in coincidence. Black Willow? This had something to do with the Black Willow operations. But Gray was just an alternate on that team, a C-string. David smiled. First Sergeant, how you doing? What's the objective? King asked, jokingly referring to the assembly of empty beer bottles. A district governor, Gray said, not thinking. King took a deep breath. Nothing's impossible. Where? 013, Gray answered. What? King looked shocked. You're over there? I guess that makes sense in a twisted sort of way. Hey, you name it, we've got it. Girls, drugs, torture. What's your pleasure? Gray asked. First Sergeant King pulled out his phone and dialed the number from memory. It was answered and he spoke. Jimmy, got someone down here you need to meet. Yes, now. I don't care. Mercury Outfielder, Mackenzie Pass. Find it. He hung up the phone and smiled. On his way. Gray scowled. Jimmy who? Croswell? Now. Don't go throwing that name around. No, he's out on the East Coast. And frankly, the less he knows about this, the better off we are. Gray shook his head. You're a guy, and your field tests? Someday it's going to blow back on you. Funny you should say that. Why? Gray asked. Is that what this is? Does it feel like your whiskers and tail are on fire? That's usually a pretty good sign. Suddenly nothing is what it seems to be. That's when you're in fox country. What are you talking about? Gray asked. You can't really be that dense, King said. You'd be surprised. Gray was getting angry and sobering up quickly. King held up his hands. Hey, I couldn't be selling you out, 'cause I don't know shit, right? The man I called knows more than me, and I trust him with my life. And yours, apparently. What don't you know? Gray mumbled through the alcohol. I haven't been here in almost 12 years. What are the chances we'd run into each other now? King asked. Well, who sent you? Gray asked. No one, that's what I'm saying. Who did you call? Homicide detective, friend of mine. Detective Cole arrived before Gray finished his beer. He was dressed in a three-piece suit. Gray guessed that a significant percentage of the weave was a bulletproof Torellium blend. It looked expensive. Gray was a couple inches taller than Cole, but the detective looked like he could put up a fight, and had on several occasions. King towered over both men as he introduced them to each other. Detective Cole asked for a beer and the three of them moved back to a table. Cole activated a signal jammer and set it on the table between them. So what do you know about the district? He asked. Everything. What do you want to know? Gray mumbled. Okay, how about, have you ever been there? Cole asked. 7 months, permanent assignment. Cole laughed. I've been investigating them for almost 6 years. I've never been there at all. Not getting very far, are you? Gray smiled. Considering the history of the place, I'm doing okay. Where were you stationed before you got there? My citizenship was sponsored in 2300, Gray answered. And? The detective asked. And everything after that is classified, Gray replied, drunkenly waving his hand flatly between them. Cole rolled his eyes and laughed out loud. Gray opened his jacket, flashing Cole a glance at his Kodak, the solid black identification bar. He did an involuntary double-take. Only a few very select professionals were issued an all-black Kodak. Even First Sergeant King had strips of white running through his. So you want my help? Gray asked. Maybe. Maybe I can help you, Cole offered. What are you going to help me with? What do you need? Cole replied. Back on District 13, despite throngs of kids milling about, there seemed to be no guards present in any of the common areas. All over the district, no patrols were patrolling, no posts being posted. The entire place was eerily quiet, dead calm. Only the guardhouses were occupied. The uniformed citizens stayed behind thick, heavy windows. The NCOs kept their units quiet. They watched the security monitors, played cards, and totally refrained from harassing the orphan residents. Chapter 24. No Retreat, No Surrender. Thursday, September 22nd, 2310. Dawn came and the sun rose on the 4th day of the students' strike from school. The guards and children steered clear of each other. Their interactions dwindled to hard stares across yards of open ground. The chow halls remained mostly closed. The few broken into by the residents remained open and crowded. Apollo continued his journey to the center of the sky without a single violent interaction between an orphan and a guard, a first in the memory of anyone living on the district. There were kids in the terminal buildings, and even kids in class, but the guard presence was minimal, and teachers had been asked to stay home for a variety of false and deceptive reasons. The truth that their safety would be in danger remained a confidential secret, but of course, they all knew the situation for exactly what it was. A lot of the kids hadn't yet heard about the administration's amnesty and looming deadline. None of them knew the security forces were gearing up for a major assault. By 11 o'clock, word had spread. The pigs were going to release Ashley Fox if everyone turned in their weapons. Many versions of the message stated only that Ash would be released at noon. Soon the twisted message was that the administration had completely folded. Over the next hour, thousands of kids flooded into the mall. They waited, chattering in a dull roar, anticipation charging the crowd. At the center of the mall was a raised platform housing the elevator bank, where the long garden crossed the short one. It was there that the orphans expected the release of their underdog hero. In the center stood 4 platoons of shock troops at parade rest. Perfectly still, their armor made them appear like shiny black statues. They were arranged in 4 separate blocks, each of them facing a different direction, down one of the long 4 lanes of the garden. Their assault rifles stood on deck, aligned along legs, perfectly still. Everyone was there. Even Dante and the Devils had come down. The children wore all kinds of protective sports equipment, in addition to the stolen police gear. They carried makeshift shields and spears hacked from tree limbs. Many held batons, kitchen knives, or broken table legs. Almost everyone had something. Yet despite all their looted and pilfered equipment, it was obvious the kids did not present any real challenge. The one thing that everyone had noticed was that the shock troops did not have Ashley. From inside her cell, Ash heard an alarm blare, followed by the sound of a heavy gate being opened. That was her signal that they were coming for her. She heard the predictable sound of heavy boots running over cement and metal floors, coming closer and closer. Then they reached her door and stopped. She wished that just once they would keep going, down to some other cell. They never did. Ash suspected she was the only prisoner in this section of the district. Outside, on the mall, Jones stood atop one of the planters and rallied the kids. He began to chant, "Free Ashley Fox!" The kids picked it up in seconds. "Free Ashley Fox! What? Free Ashley Fox! Who? Free Ashley Fox! Amen! Free Ashley Fox! Hallelujah! Free Ashley Fox! I said! Free Ashley Fox! Yes, brother! Free Ashley Fox! One more! Free Ashley Fox! It was noon. The battalion commanders shouted orders to their subordinates who repeated them. The companies of shock troops snapped to attention. All over the district, vid screens lit up, displaying the district seal, an amalgamation of the National Eagle, California State Bear, and an Angel City Coyote. Residents of District 013, a female voice announced over the loudspeakers. This is your governor speaking. It is after 12 and you haven't turned over any of those weapons you took from the legal guardians of the state. Free Ashley Fox! The kids shouted. This is your final warning. Free Ashley Fox! Put all of your weapons down immediately. Free Ashley Fox! You really want me to free Ashley Fox? The governor asked. Very well then. Kids heard the microphone thump as it was set down. They heard muffled voices, instructions given to someone on another line. Far down the mall, several levels above the chanting kids, a sniper centered his crosshairs on Kaz's forehead. On the screen, the district seal was replaced with a video live stream. A squad of riot-suited guards was dragging a hooded and straitjacketed female down a hallway. The kids lost steam and the chant disintegrated. The guards reached the lethal injection chamber and the hood was pulled from a gagged and enraged Ashley. Colonel Keller stood before her and read from a clipboard. Orphan 2310-090503, Ashley Aaron Fox. You've been found guilty of murder in the first degree. You've been sentenced to death by lethal injection. Ash went berserk. She thrashed herself loose. She kicked one guard unconscious and headbutted another, shattering several teeth. With electrically charged batons, they subdued her. The kids watched as Ashley was beaten to the ground, shocked and struck over and over again. They heard the meaty strikes. Her broken and unconscious body was lifted onto a table. The jacket was removed and she was strapped down. The guards left the room and two male nurses entered. One of them opened her shirt and affixed heart rate monitors. The other attached blood pressure sensors and brain frequency scanners. They swabbed the girl's exposed elbow with a disinfectant solution on a cotton pad, and then the nurses stepped out of frame. The kids were silent, horrified, but glued to the screens. The shock troops remained at attention. Behind riot helmets, their gaze was firmly fixed on the great beyond. On the monitors, two more doctors in surgical scrubs entered. Dr. Malice and the brute Morgenstern. The scrubs concealed their identities, but it was easy to tell who was who. Morgenstern was 6.5 feet tall. While anyone who'd ever met Dr. Malice would have found it difficult to mistake his cruel and violent eyes for someone else. Malice took another alcohol-doused cloth and again swiped at Ashley's elbow, regardless of the fact that the nurse had just done it. Why do they do that if they're just going to poison her? Hambone asked. No one answered him. On the video screens, Morgenstern handed Dr. Malice an empty syringe and a vial of poison. He held it up to the light, the green syrupy solution within rolling thickly. The doctor pierced the vial with the needle and pulled the syringe's handle out, filling it with the oily liquid. Strapped to the table, Ash whimpered and struggled, but to no avail. Malice approached her with the syringe. In the open-air mall, the kids all watched, stunned into silence as the screen displayed Ashley's futile last moments. Several looked away. Earlier, Sky hadn't let Jeff go with Kaz and the others. She'd been forced to slap him across the face to stop him, but he'd stayed with her, in the recreation room. Now he hugged her and screamed through gritted teeth, but couldn't turn away as they publicly killed his sister on live stream. The guards were called to port arms, their rifles coming up across their chests. Behind them, the stairwell doors popped open. Several guards rushed out, unrolling empty fire hoses. On screen, Ashley wasn't making it easy for them. She struggled and lunged at Malice and Morgenstern. Several guards came to assist them and hold Ashley down. She screamed into her gag and fought against the restraints. She fought with everything she had. She was fighting for her life. Dr. Malice abandoned all formalities and jabbed the needle directly into Ashley's neck, hurriedly injecting the foul poison. Ashley's fury became wild panic, followed by uncontrollable seizures. Her body snapped into vicious convulsions. Her mouth frothed and her head snapped back and forth. Then she lost the fight. Overcome with toxins, her organs gave out, her muscles seized up, and her heart stopped. The medical machines behind her screamed in protest as their patients ceased life functions, blasting out their mournful minor chord death note. The piercing sound, designed to bring able-bodied nurses, doctors, and staff, all running at a dead sprint, now screamed at a room full of people who did nothing. Outside in the mall, the video screen switched back over to the district seal, but the audible death note lingered under the still-frame broadcast. Then the tone cut out and the voice of Colonel Keller boomed over them all. The convicted murderer is hereby declared dead at 1200 hours 4 minutes, September 22nd, year 2310. The monitors then powered down. Kids were stunned. They continued to stare at the blank screens, and a single shot rang out. Kaz was taken from his feet as if hit by a truck. That was the signal for the shock troops to move in. They attacked the front ranks of the confused children, blasting the kids with wooden slugs the size of a fist, plastic pellets, and beanbags filled with pepper balls. For almost 3 minutes, the soldiers rained rubber projectile hell down upon the orphans. Soon the kids were driven back behind waist-high planters, benches, and fountains, umbrellas of cover in the otherwise open space. The troops, wearing riot helmets with built-in gas masks, fired tear gas grenades at the knots of holdouts. This was quickly followed by a torrent of horizontal water from the assembled fire hoses. Without any central command, their hero martyred. The formerly unstoppable children were reduced to panicked rabble, picked off and humiliated in their futile retreat. The soldiers chased them down and beat them into fetal positions, only to move on, chasing after kids who dared to hurl rocks in an effort to distract them from their brutality. The tear gas canisters sputtered out and the fire hoses were turned off. Then the stairwell doors were held open for dozens of waiting troops. Fresh from a few days of rest, the lightly armored guards poured out, flooding them all. At a full sprint, they pursued the fleeing orphans all across the district. They spent the early afternoon hours beating the orphans and stripping them of their state-looted gear. Throughout the rest of the day, the guard presence remained oppressive. They were everywhere, joking with each other and pounding any kids who stumbled into arm's reach. Detective Cole, First Sergeant King, and Lieutenant Gray sat around a hacked terminal in the sergeant's basement. Using Gray's passcodes, they had piped the district security feeds into the civilian residence. They watched everything leading up to Ashley's execution and now witnessed the aftermath. They watched as the orphans were decimated, ruthlessly gunned down and beaten. They watched the chamber feed where Ashley's body was disconnected from the monitors and wheeled away under a sheet. "I have to go meet 2 of these assholes in a couple hours," Cole complained. "You're undercover?" King asked. "Yeah, I'm tight with a couple of idiots who ran off a farm." "God, you can walk off a farm," Gray said. "You want any help?" King offered. "I'm cool, but I really gotta go," he said, scooping up his jacket. Gray thought about what he'd just seen. He stared hard at the ground. "There's nothing you could have done," King said. Cole looked over from his place halfway up the stairs. "Some things I don't know, and some things I can't tell you. But I bet you everything I own, she's not dead. Don't believe everything you see. This isn't over yet." The detective left Gray and King with a nod and headed up the stairwell.